you might have an ethical value system that comes out with a different answer than fiduciary duty does. And that's rough. That's why realtors drink sometimes. And
it's not just a line.
And so... interesting thing happened this week. You know how I prepare for this show?
Yes.
Is I like to look at what's going on in transactions, look at what people are saying out in the market, and then bring that to the show. And it was really interesting because it was presented by the facts of somebody saying, you know what? I feel like your realtor's a liar.
Oh.
And I feel like your realtor's being unethical, or I have that impression of what is going on.
Okay.
And so, that I wanted to go over, how does this happen sometimes? In what capacity does that happen? And what does that look like? And actually, we had a really interesting scenario on our team last week that really got me thinking about this. A couple different things happened. So we were representing a seller that was living in a multi-generational family. So you had the family and you had grandma living with them in the house, and they were moving to upgrade. And so selling the house we were representing them selling, then they had under contract to buy another house.
Okay.
And so we get a call. So the transaction's going very well. We sell the house, we get it under contract. Buyers have done their inspection. All items to be fixed have been agreed upon. Buyers have done their appraisal.
Okay.
And now we're moving to closing. So there's that time period of loan processing from basically the appraisal's done till closing. Generally 20, 25 days in that range.
Okay.
Well, in this particular case, grandma was elderly and in poor health. And so she passes away. She died in her sleep in one of the bedrooms in the house, passed away. So we get that call, terrible news, feel terrible for the sellers. And the seller says, hey, I've heard online about, people disclosing this. And so I just wanted to give you a call, let you know, and you're probably, I want you to let the buyer know that this happened.
Okay.
And so then we pause because the seller says, I want to let the buyer know that this happened. It's the right thing to do.
Yes.
So then we pause and we say to the seller, well, okay, I need you to know in the state of Washington that death within a property is not a disclosable fact. It's not considered a material property fact.
Ooh.
So then you say to the seller, do we need to disclose this to the buyer before closing?
Okay.
And so what happens in this particular case is the seller says, well, what could happen? What could happen in that situation? And so you run through the scenarios. You say, well, one of the things that could happen is they're just like, hey, totally get it. This happens all the time. Normal. Thanks for letting us know. You could have a buyer find out about this, feel very particular about it in a certain way, and back out of the transaction in that situation. So it was interesting because the call that I got after the fact, because I manage other agents within our office as the designated brokers, I got a call and they said, hey, I think your agent was being unethical and almost encouraging me not to disclose this, which was not the case because we actually at the time said, when you start talking about what could happen with the contracts, that's legal advice. Yeah. And so we have to direct you to an attorney to let you know what could potentially happen with contracts. So I went back and I talked to the seller and I said, hey, I totally understand your perspective of what happened there. I get what that looks like in that situation. But you have to remember that as agents in the state of Washington, we are bound by an RCW that is known as real estate brokerage in Washington.
Yes.
And so the very first part of that to our primary principles in the transaction creates what's known as a fiduciary duty, which says that you have to be loyal to your principal and take no action that is adverse or detrimental to their interest in a transaction.
Okay.
So imagine what happens now in the scenario where that seller calls us and says, hey, this happened. There was a death in the house. I'm going to let the buyer know. And as an agent, you just say, okay, yep, perfect. I'll call him and let him know.
Okay.
And you don't even discuss what's required in the state of Washington for that disclosure with your seller. You don't discuss it with them. You don't mention it to them. So then you disclose that to a buyer, and a buyer says, whoa, this is a big deal to me. Mm-hmm. I'm out. I'm not buying this house. So they let their earnest money go, or then now my seller can't buy their next house.
Yeah.
So in that scenario, by not telling the seller what disclosures had to be done and which ones did not have to be done, do you believe I was detrimental to that seller because the deal fell apart?
I would say no, because you were following the law.
I was following their wishes.
Yeah.
The law said we didn't have to. Mm-hmm. But when that deal falls apart and I don't tell the seller that they don't have to disclose that, was that detrimental to the seller if I didn't tell them? And then they could have not disclosed it.
Boy.
See, this gets dicey, John.
Yeah. Well, most people view transparency as a key element. Even if it falls apart, I think you're better off. Look, in the interest of transparency, we don't have to, but I feel I should.
Okay, so you bring up a good point, and this is why generally you're known as a good guy. Okay, because what happens in that situation is an agent doesn't tell their seller that.
Yeah.
They disclose. The deal falls apart, and they're trying to keep the earnest money from the buyer, or they're trying to get damages from the buyer. So they go to their attorney, and their attorney. They talk to their attorney. They say, "Hey, this deal fell apart. This buyer walked away because we told him somebody passed away in the house. The whole deal fell apart. I can't get my dream house now. I've lost all this money." And the first thing the attorney says is, well, why the heck were you disclosing that to them in the first place? Oh, well, because I thought it was the right thing to do. And the attorney's like, well, didn't your agent tell you that you didn't have to?
Oh.
And they're like, oh, well, but no, we wanted to. But your agent didn't tell you didn't have to? No, well, no, they didn't.
Okay.
Now guess who they're coming after?
The agent.
The agent in that situation, correct. And so then you're trying to prove if you were detrimental or you weren't detrimental. So real estate's easy, right? In that situation. So these are the types of situations where you have to look into, and it's really, really difficult sometimes to be legally bound by a fiduciary duty and you don't agree with what's going on in the situation. But you have to follow that. We are bound by that duty, by law, by our license, to follow that, to make sure that no harm gets done to our principal. Now, there are other duties that we still have. Don't get me wrong. There are like one of the very first things that comes in, point number 2, is to deal honestly and in good faith. 100%. That is a requirement in that case. But there becomes a discussion, especially on the legal side, is if you're violating you can't violate your fiduciary duty to make sure you're giving facts that someone else would call dishonest. This is what happens. This is why you see and hear about attorneys, realtors saying that, man, that's a situation where those people are lying all the time or they're not giving the full facts. Well, you're right. They're not. They're not giving the full set of facts because their fiduciary duty to who they represent in that transaction, the seller, That is the primary purpose of that fiduciary duty. So when that seller says, list my house at 400, but I'll take 300. Yeah, you're not telling people they'll take 300.
Yeah.
That violates the fiduciary duty. So from a buyer's perspective, they close on a transaction, they pay 380. The neighbor that the former seller that he drinks beer with out on the driveway comes over and says, my gosh, Tom never thought he'd get a penny over 300 and you paid 380. And his realtor knew that, and the buyer says that realtor is a PO, know what. And so that's what happens in those situations. But they had a legal fiduciary duty to that seller.
Yes.
They could not disclose that. So sometimes I cringe when people say, I'm only going to talk to the listing agent. I don't want an agent. I can do it myself. And they don't understand that agent that they're going to be talking to is going to be working for one person in that transaction.
Yeah.
And that's not you in that situation. And so, so I encourage people, especially in this environment we are, where it's a little bit where buyers are spending their own money, their own negotiating with their agent, know what that value is. Sometimes, like for instance, a seller will hire us as a listing agent, and they will say, hey, I do need to move this house, but I'm going to price it. We'll do our CMA. What's the market? The market's 400, and they'll say, I do need to sell this house for 400.
Okay.
I would like to, but I can get out of here for 325. I've got good equity. I've got some bills to pay. I really, if I got that offer, I would probably have to take it. And so you put a sign out front. It's got your name on it, and you're the listing agent, and somebody drives their car by and they seize your number. And John, you call me.
Yes.
Like, Lance, I'm interested in that gorgeous house you just put on the market over on Strawberry Lane.
Okay.
And I want to make an offer. Like, you tell me that.
Okay.
And then I said, okay, well, let's write it up, John. And I ask you, what do you want to offer? It's 400. It's listed at 400.
I'm going to offer 375.
375. Yep.
I'm just trying to think out of the, I'm going to start low.
Yeah. And I sitting on the phone and I'm just smiling away because I know my sellers told me that they would take 325.
Oh.
But you asked me to write it up for 375. If you knew all of that in that situation, how would you feel about me?
I would probably be thinking you're kind of a schmuck.
Okay, I thought I'd get the truth out of you. Yeah, absolutely.
I'd be thinking, wait a minute.
Now
wait a minute. And I have to admit that if I were not versed in the world of real estate, 400, I offered 375, and then I found out later the owner would have taken 325. I'd be like, if I didn't know better, then I'd be like, okay, well, how come you didn't disclose that? But then I have to remember we were talking about fiduciary responsibility or whatever.
Different in that situation. You don't call me. Okay. You have an agent you've been working with.
Yes.
You call your agent and you say, we found a house we want to try to get. What instructions do you give your agent?
Well, I give in the same situation. I tell them, okay, I saw this house they're asking for. I want you to put in an offer for 375.
Yeah, and maybe that agent says, well, John, I think we can do better than that. But now you're talking to somebody that works for you.
Yeah.
100%. And so there's a different dynamic that comes up with that situation. Another great, so that's just one. I've got hundreds of these. Another one of my agents this week comes in. I see him on Monday. Hey, how's it going? I saw emails going back and forth in our firm email. I saw you got one under contract. Congratulations. He goes, yeah, I did. It was great negotiations. My buyer is super excited that they got the house, and he goes, my buyer, I think it was a $350,000 house. He goes, my buyer wanted to put $15,000 earnest money down. Ooh. And I kind of laughed, and I'm like, please tell me you didn't do that. And he's like, no, we didn't do that. I asked him why he wanted to do so much. And he said, well, I want to show him I'm serious.
Yeah.
And so my agent said, well, you know what? You can do the same thing for $5,000 in our market. We can put $5,000 down. And the guy was like, are you sure? And my agent's like, not only am I sure, I know it's the best thing for you. That's fiduciary duty. That's an example of fiduciary duty. My agent knows that in this market, $5,000 earnest money on a $350,000 house is going to convey that they're serious. Now, they weren't competing. Maybe if there was a competing offer at the same time or something else, they would make those adjustments. They're smart. They know what they're doing. But in this case, what did he do? He reduced the liability of his client, which he has a fiduciary duty to do the right thing for, not detrimental.
Because with the lower earnest money, and especially since there wasn't a competitor.
Because what's detrimental in that situation is if something happens or an emergency happens and there's no contingencies left for our buyer, and we're 4 or 5 days from closing and he has a medical emergency or loses his job and he can't buy the house, well, if there's not a real reason to get out of that contract, likely he's going to end up doing what? Giving up
his earnest money.
And if we had let him put down 15 for no apparent reason,
he'd be out 15.
And at least in this case, he's only out 5 now. So a great agent has limited his liability by $10,000. And that's another prime example. Like these happen all day long, all the time in our office. And so that's just a way that we are working for clients when they don't even know that we're complying with those duties. And one of those duties we have is what's called reasonable care and diligence. And so that's just saying that we have to use our expertise and our skills to serve our clients effectively. So that's research, marketing properties appropriately, et cetera. But that's one of the way to ensure that the transaction goes smoothly.
Yes.
And fiduciary duties really matters because what it does is it empowers your realtor to be accountable and ensure that your interests as a client are protected. And in many, many cases, which is good for you as a consumer, is that fiduciary duty does not pay attention to how we get paid. You know, our commission, whether we're getting a commission or not, should not be involved in that equation at all.
Yeah.
And so that supersedes that in that situation. And so I have these discussions sometimes with people, and I tell you what, these are designed to get you through difficult situations. Fiduciary duty is designed to help you get through difficult situations because you have to judge what you're doing and what your actions are by that duty. And so this was a difficult one as I was prepping for the show and going through this because it's hard because sometimes you might have an ethical value system that comes out with a different answer than fiduciary duty does. And that's rough. That's why realtors drink sometimes. And
it's not just Alani's.
And so because you're put in that situation and you have to follow the fiduciary duty for the clients. So anyway, we take it very seriously. It's important to us at the Kenmore team. If you have any questions about what that means or you're in that situation, go to kenmoreteam.com.
Yes.
Shoot us a message. I will tell you the real estate market with the temperature is heated up tremendously. There are great properties out there. We're negotiating a lot of contracts right now. We're super busy. It's go time for us.
Yeah.
Give us a call, look us up, and we'll be right back here next week.